Picture a boy, maybe 9, 10 years old, bare feet, summer afternoon, Guangdong province, somewhere in the 1870s. He's in a village called Kuiheng. There's a banyan tree, the kind with the great spreading roots, and underneath the banyan tree there's an old man, really old, the kind of old where the village kids think he might have been alive forever. And every afternoon, this boy goes and sits at the old man's feet, and the old man tells him stories. Stories about marching up the Yangtze, about the gates of Nanjing, about the long-haired soldiers who were going to bring down the dynasty.
Okay.
The old man's name is Feng Shuangli. He's a Taiping veteran. And the boy listening to him, the boy who, by the way, has acquired a nickname in the village by this point, the boy's name is Sun Wen. The world will eventually know him as Sun Yat-sen.
Hang on. The founder of modern China, the guy on the money in Taiwan, the guy with the statues, learned politics from an actual Taiping rebel, sitting under a tree.
Sitting under a tree. As a child. This isn't speculation, this is in the sources. Marie-Claire Berger's biography goes into it, Spence mentions it. Feng Shuangli is a named, documented person.
And what was the village nickname?
Go on. Guess.
I'm not going to guess, James. Just tell me.
Hong Xiuquan II.
Stop it.
His friends called him Hong Xiuquan II as a child. He was role-playing the Heavenly King in the dirt outside his house.
Okay, so let me just say this so people understand what we're talking about. This is the equivalent of, I don't know, a kid growing up in 1880s Virginia, listening to Confederate veterans tell war stories, deciding he's the second coming of Jefferson Davis, and then actually successfully overthrowing the United States government.
Yes, that. Every bit of that. And we don't tell it.
And we don't tell this story. We tell the Confederate version of it constantly. We never tell this version. Right, so actually, I want to do something here, can I? Because I think people need to hear how Berger puts this.
Please.
So Marie-Claire Berger wrote what's still the standard scholarly biography of Sun Yat-sen, Stanford University Press, 1998, if anyone's looking. And the line that I keep coming back to, the line that I think reframes the entire 20th century in China, is this. Sun didn't discover the Taiping later as a political model. He was raised on them, the way other kids are raised on fairy tales. That's not a metaphor she's reaching for, she means it literally. The bedtime stories, the folk heroes, the thing the old men told the kids while they shelled peas on the porch. In Kuiheng village in the 1870s, the equivalent of King Arthur or Robin Hood was Hong Xiuquan and the Heavenly Kingdom.
And the kids weren't playing knights, James. They were playing Taiping. They were playing rebels who tried to bring down the Qing 13 years before this kid was born and only failed at the very last gasp. The whole emotional architecture of his childhood is we almost did it. The grown-ups in his life had almost won, and then they lost. And the dynasty that he can see is rotting around him is the dynasty that beat them. So when Sun founds his first revolutionary organisation in 1895, the Revived China Society, the Jingzhonghua Hui, Harold Schifrin, who wrote the great study of all this in 1968, Schifrin points out the oaths are Taiping-style oaths. The rituals are Taiping rituals. The blood brotherhood ceremony, the secret recognition signs, these are all from the old triad lodges, and the triad lodges trace themselves directly back to Taiping survivors. His 1895 Guangzhou uprising, the first time he actually tries to overthrow the Qing, is partly planned by old triad members whose grandfathers fought for Hong. These are not metaphorical descendants, these are literal descendants. The plot to overthrow the Qing in 1895 has people in the room whose family memory of the Qing is 50 years of trying to kill it.
And Schifrin's killer line, the one I want everyone to hear, is this. The Republic of China was essentially the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom rebooted with Western suits replacing the long hair. The 1911 revolution is not a new thing. It is the 1851 revolution finally finishing its sentence.
God.
I know!
And the thing that gets me is it's one human lifetime. Feng Shuangli is sitting under that banyan tree and he can remember the assault on Nanjing. He can remember the smell of it. And he's telling a small boy. And the small boy is going to overthrow the empire.
It's like, you know how everyone gets shocked when they realise that the last Civil War widow died in 2008? It's that kind of close. We think of these things as ancient, and they're not ancient. They're somebody's grandfather.
Right. And actually, I want to push this further. Because if you think the Sun connection is uncanny, wait until you hear what Mao was doing.
Go.
Okay, so 1906, give or take. There is a 13-year-old boy in Hunan province. Peasant family. Comfortable peasant, his dad's a bit of an operator, but rural. The boy is not particularly distinguished yet. He reads a lot.
And one day, he gets his hands on a book. A little book, a pamphlet, really. And he reads it, and he reads it again, and decades later, when he's the most powerful man in Asia, when he's sitting in a cave in Yan'an talking to Edgar Snow, he tells Snow that this little book set his mind racing, that it awoke his political consciousness, that this is the book that made him. And the book is called, and Sophie, I want you to pay attention to the title here. The book is called Words of Warning to a Prosperous Age, Sheng Shi Wei Yan.
Okay, why are you looking at me like that?
Because there is another book, 70 years earlier, 1836-ish, Canton, a failed exam candidate, depressed, sick, gets handed a pamphlet by a Protestant missionary on the street, a pamphlet that explains Christianity in Chinese for the first time. He throws it on a shelf, doesn't read it for years. And the Chinese title under which that pamphlet was translated and circulated, the foundational Christian tract that Hong Xiuquan finally read in 1843, the tract that convinced him he was Jesus' brother, the tract that started a war that killed 20 million people, was called Words of Warning to a Prosperous Age. The same little book.
No.
Same title. Different books, different content, completely different books, but the same title. The same kind of pamphlet, handed to the same kind of intense, bookish, dissatisfied teenage boy. 70 years apart. In both cases, it's the spark.
That's not real. That's a novelist's coincidence.
It's in Snow. It's in Stuart Schramm's Collected Works of Mao, Volume 1. Mao talks about it explicitly. He doesn't make the Hong connection in Snow's interview, at least not on the page. But the title is the title. The historians find it later.
And does Mao know? At 13, does he know he's reading a book with the same title as the one that radicalised Hong Xiuquan?
Probably not at 13, but by his 20s, absolutely. Because by his 20s, he is obsessed with the Taiping. He's reading everything he can find. And this is the bit I want to sit with for a second, because I think we rush past it. 2 boys, 2 pamphlets, 2 titles that are the same. 70 years. 1 war that kills 20 million. 1 revolution that creates the People's Republic of China. And we have invented, the West, the English language reading world, we have invented a story about modern China where it's all about the Long March and the Communist Manifesto and Marx coming in from Europe through Japan via Russia. And what we miss is that the operating system underneath was already there. Mao didn't import revolution. Revolution was on his bookshelf when he was 13. In a book with the exact title of the one that radicalised the previous millenarian who tried to bring the Qing down.
It's almost like, and I know this is a weird image, it's almost like the same ghost wrote both books. Like, there's a particular kind of pamphlet that Chinese teenage boys, in moments of imperial collapse, are vulnerable to. And it has a name. And the name is Words of Warning to a Prosperous Age.
Okay, I need to do something with this because I'm going to lose my mind otherwise.
I've been waiting for you to get to Mao since the first episode.
So, Mao doesn't just read about the Taiping. He doesn't just have his political awakening over a book with this uncanny title. He spends his entire revolutionary career studying Hong Xiuquan, the way a general studies a defeated predecessor's battle plans. That's Jonathan Spence's framing, and I love it because it's so cold, it's so clinical. Mao is not a fan of Hong. Mao is an analyst of Hong. He's the next general, looking at the previous general's map, going, where did you go wrong exactly, and how do I not do that? The Long March. Okay, the Long March is the founding myth of the People's Republic, right? 6,000 miles, the army that became a state, all that. Mao explicitly models aspects of it on Taiping strategy. The Jinggangshan base area, 1927, 1928, when he's hiding in the mountains of Jiangxi with a few thousand ragged peasants, that's a Taiping playbook. Hakka Highland strategy, the same terrain Hong used in the 1850s, in some cases, the literally same villages.
He praises Hong's land redistribution program. The Taiping had this incredibly radical land system, on paper at least, where all the land was God's land and everyone got an equal share. Mao loves this. He cites it. It's part of why he can argue that communism is not a foreign import. It's a Chinese tradition that just didn't have the right vocabulary yet. But, and this is where Mao gets interesting, in 1939 he writes an essay called The Chinese Revolution and the Chinese Communist Party, and in it he criticizes Hong. He says Hong failed to ally with the peasantry properly. He says Hong became feudal in Nanjing. Once Hong was in the heavenly capital, surrounded by silk and ceremony and his enormous harem, Hong stopped being a revolutionary and started being just another emperor. And that, says Mao in 1939, is the mistake the communists must not make. Now,
Oh, God.
let us check in on Mao Zedong in 1969. In Zhongnanhai, the imperial compound right next to the Forbidden City, living in what is functionally an emperor's apartment. Surrounded by, and this is well documented now, this is in Li Zisui's memoir, The Personal Physician, surrounded by a rotating cast of young women supplied by the cultural troops, holding court, issuing edicts, being told he is the sun in the sky. He had written 30 years earlier a critique of Hong Xiuquan for becoming a feudal patriarch with a harem and a palace. And he became a feudal patriarch with a harem in a palace.
He literally wrote the warning and then walked into it.
He studied the cautionary tale and then became the cautionary tale, which I think is the most human thing in the entire 20th century, honestly. Every one of us has done a small version of this. We've all watched a friend make a mistake and gone, well, I'll never do that. And then 6 months later, we're doing exactly that. Mao just did it with a country of 700 million people.
And Spence, Jonathan Spence, who wrote God's Chinese Son, which is the great popular biography of Hong, Spence's whole project in that book, partly, is to let the reader feel the rhyme. He doesn't make the Mao connection heavy-handedly. He just describes Hong in Nanjing in 1860. The palace, the concubines, the elaborate religious ceremonies, the purges of insufficiently loyal comrades, the increasing detachment from reality. And any reader who knows 20th century Chinese history is going, oh no, we're going to do this again?
Yeah. And the question that hangs over this entire episode, honestly, is did Mao avoid Hong's mistakes, or did he recreate them? At vastly greater scale, with vastly better organization, but recreate them nonetheless.
And we're going to come back to that. We're going to come back to the question of whether the Cultural Revolution is just the Heavenly Kingdom 2.0 with better logistics. Because I think there's a real case for it and a real case against it, and I want to have that fight properly.
Good. Park it. Because before we get there, I want to do something visible. Something you can actually see. Because so far, everything we've talked about is books and influence and ideology. And I think there's a moment in 1911 that makes all of this sort of physical.
The hair.
I want you to do this one. Because it's the image that finally makes the ideology physical. And you've got the photographs. Go.
Right, so 1911. The Wuchang Uprising kicks off in October. The Qing dynasty is collapsing in slow motion over the next few months, and Sun Yat-sen comes back from exile in January 1912 to become provisional president of the new republic. And one of the very first acts, one of the first official decrees of the Republic of China, is an order that all Chinese men must cut off their queues. The long braid down the back, the pigtail.
Now, you have to understand what the queue was. The queue was imposed on Han Chinese men in 1645 by the conquering Manchus. It was a loyalty marker. The Manchu phrase was, and this is brutal, keep your hair, lose your head. Keep your head, lose your hair. You wore the queue or you died. For 260 years, every adult male Han Chinese walked around with a Manchu hairstyle on his head. It was a daily physical reminder of ethnic subjugation. And what was the very first thing the Taiping did in 1851? They cut their queues. They grew their hair out in front. That's why the Qing called them the Chang Mao Zai, the long-haired bandits. The hair was the rebellion. The hair was the politics. Henrietta Harrison has this wonderful book, The Making of the Republican Citizen, and her argument is that the queue is the visible thread running from 1853 to 1911. You can literally see the ideological continuity. It's stitched into people's scalps. And in 1912, when the Republican soldiers marched through Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou with scissors, and they're doing this, by the way, often forcibly, grabbing men in the street and cutting their queues off, what they are doing, in the most physical way imaginable, is finishing a job that Hong Xiuquan started 60 years earlier.
Harrison's line, which I love, she says cutting the queue was saying, out loud, with your body, I am completing the Heavenly King's work. Even if you'd never read a word of Taiping theology, even if you thought Hong was a madman, when your queue came off, you were inside that lineage. And here's the bit that for me makes the whole thing click. The Republican soldiers in some photographs from 1912, there's a particular set in Wuchang, they have grown their front hair out. They're wearing the Chang Mao style. Not all of them, but enough. They are dressing as Taiping rebels. 60 years of imperial repression, 20 million dead, and the very first generation that finally pulls down the Qing dynasty puts on the costume of the rebels who failed. Like, they go into the dressing up box of history and the outfit's still there and they wear it. And nobody, almost nobody, at the time says this is weird. It just feels right. The hair was already political. The hair was waiting. That's
a really good image. It's the costume in the closet thing. Like a son putting on his father's coat.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the father lost. The father lost catastrophically. But the coat still fits.
Okay, I want to slow down. Because we've been moving fast, and I think we need to actually sit with what... Sorry, can I just do this?
Please, go.
Because we keep saying 20 million. We keep saying it. And I don't think 20 million means anything to anyone anymore. It's a number you say. And I want to actually do the demographic ghost for a minute, because this is the bit that haunts me. So, Cao Shuji, this is the great Chinese demographic historian. His multi-volume Zhongguo Renkou Shi, History of Chinese Population, the 2001 Fudan University volume, he spent decades reconstructing county-by-county census data for the war years. And his work is the reason the death toll keeps getting revised upward, because the old figure, 20 million, was just the direct war dead. Battlefield casualties, massacres, sieges. What Cao did was count the famine deaths, the disease deaths, the people who starved in the depopulated regions in the years after the war ended. And when you fold all of that in, his estimate runs to 70 million. 70 million people in about 14 years, mostly in a handful of provinces. Anhui province. Anhui in 1850 was one of the wealthiest, most densely populated agricultural regions on the planet.
The lower Yangtze had been the cultural and economic heart of China for 1,000 years. Yangzhou, Suzhou, Hangzhou, Nanjing, these were the cities. These were the cities the way Florence and Venice were cities. Centres of learning and silk and porcelain and poetry going back to the Tang dynasty.
Anhui lost 2/3 of its population. 2/3. And it didn't recover. Some counties, and Cal's data shows this, were still depopulated in the 1940s. 90 years after the war ended, the fields were still growing back over the bones. There's this image I can't get out of my head, and this is from Platt, actually, Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom. He describes travellers in the 1880s in the lower Yangtze region, 20 years after the war is over, and they're walking through what used to be the richest farmland in Asia, and it's wild grass, waist high, abandoned villages, roof beams collapsed, wells full of skulls, tigers. There are reports of tigers moving back into the lowlands because there are no humans. Tigers in the suburbs of Nanjing in 1880. And Platt's line, this is the one that broke me when I read it. Platt says, at some point, when the number gets this big, it stops being a war and starts being a civilizational catastrophe. It stops being something a country survives and starts being something a country has to be rebuilt out of. Every decade of new demographic research, he says, adds another 10 million to the death toll. We don't actually know how many people died. We genuinely don't know. The graves keep being found. The county records keep being recovered. The number keeps going up.
And here's what kills me. Modern China. The China that exists today. The one with the gleaming Shanghai skyline and the high-speed rail. The geography of that China is shaped by this. The reason the coast is rich and parts of the interior are still struggling, some of that is the Taiping. The reason certain dialects exist in certain places and not others, some of that is the Taiping. The reason the cuisine of certain regions is what it is, the reason certain temples are missing, the reason certain family trees just stop in 1862. The Taiping. We are living in a world the Taiping dead built, or rather, the world they left, the empty places they left. And nobody outside China knows. Sorry, that got heavy.
No, don't apologise. That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's the actual subject. And the tiger detail. Where is that from?
Platt? Platt cites a missionary account, I think. There are several travellers writing in the 1870s and 80s about wildlife reclaiming the lower Yangtze. It's something.
God.
And on top of all that, and this is where I want to hand to you, because this is your guy, the people who won this war didn't actually survive it either. Not psychologically, did they?
No, they didn't. And actually, can I do Zheng? I want to do Zheng properly. Because we've talked about him as a strategist, but we haven't talked about him as a man. And I think that's the missing piece.
Because I think people need to understand that winning the Taiping War was not a thing you could survive intact. So, Zheng.
So Zheng Guofan, the Confucian scholar general who built the Qiang army and crushed the Taiping, the man Chiang Kai-shek worshipped, the man Mao read in secret, the most contested figure in modern Chinese memory. And the standard biography of him in English is still William James Hale's 1927 book, Zheng Guofan and the Taiping Rebellion, Yale University Press, which is 100 years old now, but nobody's replaced it, because Hale had access to Zheng's complete diaries, which run to many volumes, and he just sat with them. And what comes out of those diaries? The man was destroyed. Throughout the entire campaign, he suffered from horrific skin conditions, this awful chronic eczema that made him bleed through his robes. He had insomnia so bad he was sometimes hallucinating. Depression.
clinical modern sense depression that he describes with a precision that's frankly shocking for the 1860s. And twice, at least twice that we can document, he tried to kill himself. In 1855, after a catastrophic naval defeat at Zhujiang, he literally jumped into a river. His staff fished him out. In 1860, during another bad stretch, he tried again. We don't have all the details on that one, but it's referenced in his own writing.
And the line. Hale quotes this diary entry, and I've had it in my head all week. Zeng writes, "I have killed so many that even the rivers refuse to drown me." Even the rivers refuse to drown me. From the man who saved the dynasty, from the Confucian saint. That's what he was writing alone at night in his command tent while ordering the next day's executions. And he didn't stop. That's the other thing. He kept going. He kept signing the orders. He executed surrendered Taiping by the tens of thousands. When Nanjing fell in 1864, his brother Zeng Guochuan was in command of the sack, and the slaughter was systematic. We don't know how many. 100,000 more? Bodies in the Yangtze for weeks. The river ran a colour people described in letters and never got out of their nightmares. Zeng knew. Zeng knew what was happening. He wrote about it. And he hated himself. And he kept doing it. Because he genuinely, sincerely believed he was saving Chinese civilization from a millenarian cult. And that the cost was his soul. And he would pay it. After the war, he became, officially, the great Confucian sage of the late Qing. His letters, the family letters, the Zhengguofan Jiaoshu, became the most read self-help and management book in 20th century China. Read by Chiang Kai-shek, read by Mao, read today by Chinese business executives and Xi Jinping. The man is on bedside tables across modern East Asia. But he died in 1872, a wreck. Skin still bleeding, eyes failing, convinced he was damned. Platt quotes him near the end, saying he had become, and I'm paraphrasing, a man with no peace in this life and no hope for the next. And then Li Hongzhang, his protege, the brilliant younger man Zhang raised up. Li outlives Zhang by 30 years and spends those 30 years signing every surrender. Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895, that's the one that gives Taiwan to Japan. The Boxer Protocol in 1901, the one that financially ruins the dynasty for good. And there's a detail that Spence has, Jonathan Spence, The Search for Modern China. Li signs the Boxer Protocol in November 1901, having travelled across half of China to do it. And he goes home, and within days he is coughing blood. And he dies. Spence's line is brutal. He says Li Hongzhang's career was the long, slow funeral of the dynasty his teacher had resurrected. They saved the Qing in 1864, and they spent the next 40 years watching it die anyway, slowly, in humiliating installments with their signatures on every one of them.
I keep thinking about Li Hongzhang getting on that train to sign the Boxer Protocol. He knows what he's doing. He's done it before. He just goes. And the kicker, and this is Philip Kuhn's argument, and it's the one that I think permanently changes how you see the Qing collapse. Kuhn's book is Rebellion and Its Enemies in Late Imperial China, Harvard, 1970. Still the definitive structural account. Kuhn's argument is that the Qing didn't fall in 1911. The Qing fell in 1864. Because the moment the Manchu court had to admit it couldn't crush the Taiping with its own banner armies, the moment they had to authorize Zheng Guofan, a Han Chinese, to raise a private regional army loyal personally to him, the dynasty was over. The banner armies were the whole basis of Manchu rule. They were the conquering instrument. They were how 1% of the population dominated 99% of the population for 2.5 centuries. And in the 1850s, they had to admit those armies couldn't fight. They had to hand the sword to the Han. And once you handed the sword to the Han, you don't get it back. Zheng was loyal. Zheng was famously painfully loyal. But his successors and his successors' successors? What? The Shang army and Li Hongzhang's Wei army became the template for every regional military force in modern China. The Beiyang army that produces Yuan Shikai, the warlord armies of the 1920s. Arguably, Kuhn implies this and others have pushed it harder. Even the regional command structure of the People's Liberation Army today.
Every warlord who carved up China in the 1920s, every single one of them, traces his command lineage back to an army that was raised to fight the Taiping. The Qing didn't die in 1911. The Qing died the moment they had to be saved by armies they didn't control. And that's why, coming back to Zheng, that's why his suicide attempts make this awful kind of sense. Because at some level he understood. He understood that by saving the dynasty, he was destroying it. He was solving the immediate problem and creating a worse one. The river wouldn't drown him because the river knew what he'd done.
Oh, yeah. The rivers refuse to drown me because the river know.
He saved it. He destroyed it, both at once with the same hand.
God. Okay, I need to do something. I need to do the thing I've been holding on to for an hour now, because we keep talking about the Taiping as a catastrophe, which they were, undeniably. But there's a version of this story that's actually one of the great heartbreaks of modern history, and I want to do it now before we leave the 19th century. Can I?
Hong Rengan.
Hong Rengan, yes.
So, Hong Rengan is Hong Xiuquan's cousin. He's the cousin who actually became a real Christian, like properly trained, lived in Hong Kong for years, worked with Western missionaries, learned English, learned about steam engines and newspapers and joint stock companies and the British legal system. He spent the 1850s as essentially a junior associate at the London Missionary Society in Hong Kong, while his cousin was conquering half of China. And in 1859, he finally makes the journey to Nanjing. He arrives at the heavenly capital, and his cousin, who hasn't seen him in over a decade, embraces him and within weeks makes him the Gan Wang, the Shield King, basically the Prime Minister of the Heavenly Kingdom. And Hong Rengan sits down and writes a document called the Zizeng Xinpian, the New Treatise on Aids to Administration, published in Nanjing in 1859. And this document, I had to read it twice. The first time I read it, I thought I'd got the date wrong. This document proposes, for China, in 1859, a national railway system, steamship lines, a modern postal service, newspapers, including specifically newspapers free from government censorship, a patent system to encourage invention, joint stock companies, banks, insurance, trial by jury, an end to foot binding, an end to slavery, public hospitals, schools for the poor.
In 1859, 6 years before the Meiji Restoration in Japan, 30 years before the Qing seriously attempted any of this, 40 years before the Boxer reforms, Hong Rengan, in 1859, in the middle of a religious civil war, in the capital of a millenarian Christian rebellion, hands his cousin a complete blueprint for turning China into a modern industrial nation. And the document survives. We have it. And on Hong Rengan's draft, Zhen Yuwen, in his 1973 Taiping Revolutionary Movement, Yale, transcribes this. Hong Xiuquan's marginal notes are on the manuscript. The Heavenly King read his cousin's modernization plan, and he scribbled, and I'm not making this up, he scribbled things like good and I agree and this is right in the margins. And then he did absolutely nothing. He approved every paragraph and implemented none of it. He liked the idea of being a modern monarch, in the way he liked the idea of being Jesus' brother, as a fantasy, as a thing to mention, not as a programme of action. And Zhen Yuwen, the great Taiping historian who interviewed actual Taiping veterans in the 1920s, which is a callback we should sit with for a second because that's how close this all is. Zhen calls Hong Rengan's treatise the great might have been of Chinese history. Meiji Japan, written in Chinese 6 years before Meiji, by a man who would be dead within 5 years, in a regime that would be ash within 5 years, in a city that wouldn't recover for a century.
That's extraordinary. It sounds like everything we've talked about, all the difficult questions, that clash of civilizations, the problem of modernization in Chinese history, the hopes and dreams of people like Hong Rengan, they all bundled into this moment in 1859. What was the driving force behind this? What was the motivation?
The driving force? Well, on the one hand, you have the revolutionary spirit, this idea that the Taiping Han, that proud elite within them, they were already disinherited. They were already rebellious. Then you have this drive to reform, modernise. That's a great reality to the Taiping. But it's a cultural shift too. It's a way to dream of a different future, a way to reach for a different possibility. And to get to that point, you need absolutely everything.
That's unbelievable. It almost sounds like anyone who came before the Taiping, anyone who came after the Taiping, they've all somehow been painted over.
Hong Rengan was captured by Qing forces in 1864. They executed him. Before he was killed, he wrote a confession. And the confession is mostly about the new treatise. He doesn't apologise for the rebellion. He apologises for not being able to implement his plan. He spends his last days, his last hours, writing about railways, trying to get the ideas down on paper before they killed him, as if maybe somebody would read it later. Somebody did. We'll come back to that. But the heartbreak of it is China didn't get its Meiji. Japan got its Meiji and went on to dominate East Asia for 90 years. China got its Hong Rengan and shot him. And the document sat in a drawer for over a century.
Somebody did. Vogel has this moment. Ezra Vogel, Deng Xiaoping and the Transformation of China, Harvard, 2011. You're going to want to sit down for this. 1978. Deng Xiaoping, third plenum of the 11th Central Committee. He's about to launch the reforms that will turn China into the second largest economy on Earth.
Right.
Ezra Vogel, Deng Xiaoping and the Transformation of China, Harvard, 2011, catches this little moment. Deng, in one of his early speeches making the case for opening up, cites the Zizeng Xinpian. He cites Hong Rengan. He says, look, China has been trying to do this for over a century. He uses a Taiping document to justify capitalism in a Marxist-Leninist state.
So the Communist Party used a Christian millenarian's cousin's policy document to legitimise market reforms.
In a state founded by a man who studied the Taiping as a teenager.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hong Rengan waited 119 years for someone to read his homework.
And listen, I want to do something here. Because we've been on the deaths for a long time, and the Hong Rengan thing is the great might have been. But there's something I want to zoom out and do, because it's been bothering me the whole episode.
Wait, because I think there's a version of this that completely changes the genre of what Hong is. He's not a singular madman. You're about to tell me he's not even unusual.
I want to do the century. Because we keep talking about Hong like he's this one-off, failed examinee, has a breakdown, thinks he's Jesus' brother, kills 20 million people, right? Singular. Bizarre. He wasn't singular. Not at all. The 19th century was on fire with these people, globally. And I think you can't understand Hong unless you understand that he was the apex predator of a whole prophetic ecosystem that was active across the entire planet at the same time.
Start in the United States.
1820s. A teenager in upstate New York called Joseph Smith goes into the woods, has a vision, and comes out claiming an angel has shown him golden plates with a new scripture. By the 1840s, he's running a theocratic city-state in Illinois with a private army and dozens of wives. He gets murdered in 1844, exactly the period Hong is having his fever dreams in Guangxi. 2 failed young men, 2 private religious visions, 2 armed theocracies. One in Nauvoo, one in Nanjing. Move to Persia. 1844. A merchant from Shiraz called the Bab declares himself the gate to a new prophet. He gathers tens of thousands of followers. The Persian state executes him in 1850. The same year Hong launches the Jintian uprising. Same year. And the Babi movement becomes the Baha'i faith, which still has millions of adherents. Move to Sudan. 1881. Muhammad Ahmad declares himself the Mahdi, the awaited one, builds a theocratic state in the Sahara, crushes the Anglo-Egyptian forces, and in 1885 takes Khartoum. And here's where it gets uncanny. The British officer he kills on the staircase of the governor's palace, the man speared in his white uniform, is Charles Gordon. The same Gordon who commanded the ever-victorious army against the Taiping in 1863.
Gordon spent his entire military career fighting self-proclaimed messiahs. He killed thousands of Hong Xiuquan soldiers in the Yangtze Delta, and 21 years later, he was killed by another prophet with a sword on a different continent. 2 false messiahs bookending one British life. Move to the American plains, 1890. The ghost dance movement spreads through the Lakota and the Paiute. A prophet called Wovoka says the ancestors will return, the buffalo will return, the white men will vanish. It ends at Wounded Knee in December 1890, 300 Lakota dead. Move to India, Hindu revivalist movements, the Brahmo Samaj, the Arya Samaj, prophetic reformers right through the second half of the century. Move to West Africa, the various Mahdist and Islamic reform movements, the Sokoto Caliphate before that. Move to Brazil, Antonio Conselheiro in Canudos in the 1890s, a millenarian peasant prophet who builds a holy city in the backlands, and the Brazilian army has to fight 4 campaigns to destroy it. The last campaign uses cannons. Every continent, every decade, the 19th century is a forest of prophets, and the British Empire, because it's the empire that's everywhere, keeps tripping over them. Gordon at Nanjing, Gordon at Khartoum. The Sepoy Mutiny in 1857 had its own millenarian threads. Even the Maori How movement in New Zealand in the 1860s. They are literally everywhere the British go.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it sounds like a sea of prophets and revivalism styming from all corners. I mean, how did the British Empire manage to keep a lid on it all? I mean, every continent, every decade. The 19th century is a forest of prophets, and the British Empire, because it's the empire that's everywhere, keeps tripping over them. Gordon at Nanjing, Gordon at Khartoum. The Sepoy Mutiny in 1857 had its own millenarian threads. Even the Maori How movement in New Zealand in the 1860s. They are literally everywhere the British go. Oh my goodness. I mean, it sounds like a sea of prophets and revivalism styming from all corners. I mean, how did the British Empire manage to keep a lid on it all? I mean, every continent, every decade. The 19th century is a forest of prophets, and the British Empire, because it's the empire that's everywhere, keeps tripping over them. Gordon at Nanjing, Gordon at Khartoum, the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857.
Why? Because the century is breaking. Industrial capitalism is arriving. Old religions are being challenged by missionaries, by science, by railways, by newspapers. Rural populations are being squeezed by population growth and falling prices. And into that pressure, into that exact pressure, old folk religion mutates and produces prophets. Dozens of them, hundreds of them. Hong Xiuquan is not the weird one. Hong Xiuquan is the type specimen. He is the most successful, by an order of magnitude, example of the most common religious phenomenon of the 19th century. And that's the part that I think actually changes how you see him. He's not a freak. He's the apex. Joseph Smith gets a city, the Bab gets a movement, the Mahdi gets a Sudan, the ghost dance gets a massacre. Hong Xiuquan gets half a continent and 20 million dead. He is the deadliest prophet of the deadliest century for prophets. He's the world champion.
And the rivers know.
The rivers know.
Okay. I want to push on something, though. Because the global pattern thing is, yes, brilliant. I love that framing. I'm stealing it. But it raises something that's been bugging me all series, and I think we have to do it now.
Hang on. Are you saying the pattern didn't terminate? Because I think that's a harder argument than it looks. The pattern didn't stop in 1900. That's my problem with the, oh, what an interesting 19th century phenomenon framing. The Boxers, 1900, millenarian, rural, spirit possession rituals, anti-foreign, children of the Taiping. Daniel Overmeyer says folk Buddhist religion, Harvard, 1976. The Warlord period, the Red Spears, the Yellow Spears, rural religious militias all the way through the 1920s. And then, 1999, Falun Gong. 10,000 practitioners surround Zhongnanhai in silent protest. Out of nowhere. No one in the party saw it coming. And the CCP loses its mind, cracks down with a ferocity that genuinely shocked Western observers at the time. Because Falun Gong on paper looked like, what, a meditation movement? Some breathing exercises and moral pamphlets? Why does the most powerful state on earth panic at breathing exercises? David Ownby answers this. Falun Gong and the Future of China, Oxford, 2008. His argument is the CCP's terror was rational. They were not overreacting because they know in their bones what a rural Chinese religious movement can do. They know it better than anyone. They have a curriculum on it. It's called the 19th century.
Ownby's line, and I had to read this twice too. Ownby says the party's reaction to Falun Gong tells you they take Hong Xiuquan more seriously than Western China watchers do. They've never stopped scanning the countryside for the next one. Because in their institutional memory, a man with a fever dream in a village can become 20 million dead and the fall of a dynasty within 15 years. So when Xi Jinping's security apparatus cracks down on house churches today, and they do constantly year after year, that's not just generic authoritarianism. That's a state that has read its own history extremely carefully and decided that rural Christianity in China is a Category 5 hurricane risk. Because it was once, and the file is still open. Which means, and this is the bit that I find genuinely unsettling, the Taiping aren't a 19th century story. They're a live national security concern in 2024. A man in Beijing in a suit is right now, today, reading a memo about a village pastor in Henan, and somewhere in the back of his mind is Hong Xiuquan. That's not historical analogy, that's an operational threat assessment.
How is nobody writing this? This is a functioning explanation of CCP behaviour in 2024, and it comes from reading the 1850s carefully? How is this not on the front page of every China desk?
And then, okay, you want to laugh? You want to laugh after that?
Please.
In the same country, at the same time, with the same security apparatus monitoring religious movements, Hong Xiuquan has a fandom.
He does.
Ian Johnson, The Souls of China, Pantheon, 2017, and various contemporary reports, found these online forums, Chinese language, Hong Xiuquan Stan accounts. There is anime-style fan art of the Heavenly King. There are anti-Manchu nationalists who love him because he hated the Qing. There are anti-Confucian iconoclasts who love him because he smashed the temples. There are weird neo-religious revivalists who think he was onto something. There are edgy teenagers who think he's a meme. In 2024, in the People's Republic of China, there is Hong Xiuquan fan art. The censors periodically delete the forums. The forums periodically come back. Johnson's line is, the Heavenly King has fan accounts.
What other 19th century apocalyptic religious leaders have stan accounts? Is there Mardi Twitter?
There is absolutely Mardy Twitter. There is Joseph Smith Twitter, although that one's a whole religion, so it doesn't count. There is, God help us, Confederate Twitter. The internet is a graveyard where every losing side gets a second life.
And the CCP has to police Hong Xiuquan fan art while also officially honouring him at the Memorial Hall.
Oh yes, do the museum guide voice. I've been waiting.
Welcome to the Hong Xiuquan Memorial Hall in Hua County, Guangdong. Here we see the great peasant revolutionary leader, an early forerunner of the democratic struggle. Please do not ask about the personal religious beliefs of the leader. Please do not inquire about the 88 concubines. Please do not mention the cousin who tried to industrialize China and was ignored. Please proceed to the gift shop.
Toby Meyer-Fong's whole argument, basically. What remains, Stanford, 2013. The official Hong is a fictional character. The Jesus brother part is just gone, edited out. They have made a Marxist hero out of a Christian millenarian by simply removing the Christianity. It's like a museum exhibit on David Koresh that doesn't mention the religion.
And Kerry Brown, CEO China, IB Taurus 2016, points out that Xi Jinping has officially praised both Hong Xiuquan and Zheng Guofan, the rebel and the man who killed him, in separate speeches, with a straight face.
In Xi's China, you can be on the team that won and the team that lost. Very inclusive. Everyone gets a participation trophy. History as a buffet.
Brown's line is, under Xi, both the rebels and the loyalists are heroes. History as a buffet.
Which is the perfect callback to the thing you said an episode ago about Mao reading Zheng Guofan's letters in private while publicly calling him the butcher of the Chinese people. Every Chinese leader has done this. They denounce one side in public and study the other in private. Mao reads Zheng, Chiang reads Zheng, Deng reads Hong Rengan. Xi reads everybody. The argument that started in Guangxi in 1851 is still going. They're all still inside it.
Which brings me to the thing I want to do before we land this, because this has been bothering me, the whole series, and I cannot let it go. Page 4.
Page 4.
Stephen Platt, Autumn in the Heavenly Kingdom, Knopf, 2012. He went into the New York Times archives. August 1864. The fall of Nanjing. The end of the deadliest civil war in human history up to that point. 100,000 dead in 3 days in a single city. The collapse of the Heavenly Kingdom. Page 4. Page 1 was Sherman. Sherman was marching through Georgia. Page 1 was Atlanta. Page 2 was Grant in Virginia. Page 3 was Lincoln campaigning for re-election. Page 4 was, in a small column, brief, no follow-up, the largest city in China had fallen, and a war that killed 20 million people had ended. And that's the moment Western memory of the Taiping was decided. Not by racism exactly, not even mainly by distance, by the news cycle, by Sherman.
Platt's framing is, Gettysburg killed 50,000 in 3 days, and we built a national park. Nanjing killed 100,000 in 3 days, and we don't even know the name of the battle. We don't have a name for it. Children in American schools learn about Gettysburg. They never hear the word Nanjing in this context. They might hear it once in a different war 80 years later.
And it hasn't been corrected. There is no major English language feature film about the Taiping. There is no prestige TV series. There is one chapter sometimes in a global history textbook. The most seen Western depiction is 12 seconds in 55 Days at Peking, a 1962 Charlton Heston film that's actually about the Boxers 35 years later.
There are 12 Pearl Harbor films. There are more Adam Sandler films than there are major English language Taiping films. There are 5 Alamo films. The Alamo killed 200 people. 200.
The math isn't even close.
And it never got corrected, because the page 4 problem compounds. If it's not on the front page in 1864, there are no English language novels in 1880. If there are no novels, there's no popular history in 1920. If there's no popular history, there are no films in the 1950s.
If there are no films, your grandparents never hear the word. If your grandparents never hear it, you never hear it. And here we are in 2024 doing 7 episodes about the deadliest war of the 19th century. And people will message us saying they'd never heard of it.
Yeah. Okay. I want to do the last one. Because, yeah, I want to do it. Can I?
You flagged him as the one who actually spoke to them. We have to do that. Because that's not a citation. That's something else.
Jen Yuwen, The Taiping Revolutionary Movement, Yale, 1973.
I want to come back to him because I flagged him earlier and then we ran past it. Jen Yuwen in Pinyin was a Chinese historian, born 1896, died 1978. And in the 1920s, when he was a young man starting his career, he traveled around southern China and he interviewed people who had been Taiping soldiers. He sat down with men who had been in the army, who had marched up the Yangtze, who had been inside Nanjing during the siege, who had survived 1864.
In the 1920s, the decade of jazz, the decade of the Charleston, of the Model T, of radio broadcasting, of Babe Ruth, of the first sound films, the decade of my grandmother's birth. And in that decade, in southern Chinese villages, there were old men in their 70s and 80s who, as teenagers, had served Hong Xiuquan. Jen wrote down what they said. And his book is still on our shelves. We have it. Stephen Platt cites it, Spence cites it, we cite it. And behind the citations are men with faces and names who remembered watching the Heavenly King's banners, who remembered the long hair, who remembered comrades dying, who remembered the fall of cities. The last living witnesses to the rebellion died in the era of jazz, which is the callback I've been chasing the whole episode because we started this whole series with, what was it, Sun Yat-sen as a boy in Kuiheng village, sitting under banyan trees listening to the old veteran Feng Shuangli tell war stories. Marie-Claire Bergeret's image, Bergeret, Stanford, 1998. The chain of memory from 1864 to 1911 is one human lifetime. The chain from 1864 to Jen Yuwen interviewing veterans is one human lifetime. The chain from Jen Yuwen writing in 1973 to us sitting here is one human lifetime. 3 lives. That's it. That's the whole distance between us and the Heavenly Kingdom. 3 handshakes. It's not history. It's just yesterday with a longer shadow.
3 handshakes. I don't know what to do with that. I genuinely don't know what to do with that number.
3 handshakes. And the wound never healed, because the wound is still inside the people making the decisions. She reads Zheng. The CCP polices house churches because of Hong. Deng quoted Hong Rengan to launch the economy you bought your phone from. The argument is still going. Okay. Landed.
In 1837, a young man in a village in Guangdong sat for the Imperial Civil Service examinations in the city of Guangzhou. He had sat for them before. He would sit for them again. He failed all 4 times. He went home, and he had a fever. He had a dream. He lay in bed for 40 days while his family thought he was dying. And 6 years later, 6 years, he picked up a Christian missionary pamphlet he'd been given on the steps of the examination hall by a street preacher, and he read it. And he decided that the dream had been a vision,
And the vision had told him he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, and he was meant to overthrow the Qing dynasty and establish the heavenly kingdom of great peace on earth. And he did. Partly. He took half of China. He killed 20 million people. Or 30. Or 70. Depending on which demography you trust and how broadly you define a death.